So welcome back, everyone. It's 9:01. Is that close enough? I know the Baptist in me wants to wait another 5 minutes, kind of thing. But hope everyone had a good week. Um, on this day, June 22nd, our Red Letter Day. Well, not really a Red Letter Day. On this date in 431, the Council of Ephesus opened. This is the third ecumenical conference that was, as I recall, I don't have it written down, was put together to discuss the person of Christ. I'm not 100% certain on that. I don't want to get too far ahead because if I do go through and say, hey, I'm going to do a session on councils and creeds, and I want to save it for that. But it was on this day, 431. In 1535, Catholic Cardinal John Fisher was beheaded by Henry VIII for refusing to support, for two things. He refused to support Henry VIII's divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and refusing to acknowledge Henry VIII as the head of the Church of England. So this was Henry VIII, ostensibly non-Catholic, executing somebody here. Incidentally, John Fisher was canonized as a saint in 1935. There's a trend today. You'll notice this. There's a trend. Okay, so later on these. In 1633, on this date, Galileo, who incidentally was born on February 15th, it's a great day to be born, was renounced some of his specific views upon pressure by the Pope and the Catholic Church, is specifically that the Earth orbits the sun. So he said, we're going to excommunicate you if you don't deny this. And so he said, okay. And the Vatican in 1992 acknowledged that they mishandled this. Just 300 years later, they figured, hey, by the way, we may not have been right on that point. In 1714, Matthew Henry died. Anybody know the name Matthew Henry? Does that mean anything to anyone? Yes. He wrote a commentary that has been in never-ending print forever. When I was in college, it was you could tell you were in a Bible major's room because the Bible major had Matthew Henry's commentary. It was a 5-set commentary, and at one point I had Matthew Henry's commentary. I do not have Matthew Henry's commentary anymore. It was one of those, I'm not using this, and I know somebody who would use this, so I gave it to him. Jonathan Edwards on this date. Jonathan Edwards in 1750 was dismissed from his church at Northampton. Now, this is the same Jonathan Edwards who, from the church at Northampton, had created a great revival. Was the lead of the Great Awakening of that time period. Some 20, 30 years later, he was dismissed from his Northampton, Massachusetts church for rejecting a halfway covenant. A halfway covenant, that being the idea that somebody who was not a member of the church could have their kids become members or get baptized, whereas previously you had to be a church member, and he rejected that. 150 years later, the church would erect a statue to Jonathan Edwards out in front of so I guess they realized 150 years later that, hey, maybe we didn't handle that correctly. Finally, it was on this date in 1955 that a movie was released that I honestly, this is confession time, have never seen, but Lady and the Tramp was released on this date. Anybody else have seen Lady and the, with the two dogs that are eating the spaghetti? I've seen that scene 1,000 times. Yeah, but I have never seen the movie Lady and the Tramp. So your job, your duty today is to go home and watch Lady and the Tramp, kind of thing. So, all right. Pardon me? There are worse. Okay. Well, now that's a full-throated endorsement if I ever heard one, kind of thing. So, so there's a lot of things that have happened in the world. I'm going to go to prayer here. A lot of things have happened in the world. For those of you who have paid any attention to the news, Brian Wilson died. From the Beach Boys, and so the internet has been all over tributes to Brian Wilson. Walter Brueggemann died recently. Walter Brueggemann was a well-known Bible teacher, scholar. He wrote a book called The Prophetic Imagination, which was probably his best known. He also wrote a commentary for the New International Theological Series on Samuel, which is one of the commentaries that I'm using. So whether you knew it or not, you have been influenced by Walter Brueggemann. And again, let's see what else happened. What else has happened this past week? Oh yeah, the U.S. bombed Iran. So that was, and that brought to light some interesting things. Especially, I don't know if you've seen it. There's an exchange floating around social media between Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, and Tucker Carlson, who's a news guy. He's got a podcast or a news show or something. I don't particularly follow either one of these guys, but I see enough of them that that's Tucker Carlson, no, that's Ted Cruz, kind of thing. But they have an interesting conversation, and I think what's kind of interesting. Has anybody seen this clip that I'm talking about, where both of them are kind of conservative-ish, Republican-ish, and yet this is this idea of bombing Iran is something that is not going over well with a lot on the right. And Tucker Carlson is representing the view that this should not be going on, and that we should not be bombing Iran, we should not be supporting Israel in this. And Ted Cruz is giving a full-throated endorsement of saying we should. And what's interesting is, and they're both presenting two distinct views that are based in theological positions. One of them, so Ted Cruz is supporting what we would call a dispensational approach to the Bible, whereas Tucker Carlson is presenting more along the line of a covenant theological approach. It has to do with what is the role of Israel in future prophecy or in times today. And so the dispensational approach, and I consider myself a dispensationalist, and this church is generally a dispensationalist. If you say that, if you believe, how do you know if you're a dispensationalist? Well, do you believe that Jesus is going to return and call up everybody in the air, the rapture, and then you're a dispensationalist, okay? But one of the distinctive elements of dispensationalism is that it looks at the promises to Israel in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, that when the Bible says this is going to happen to Israel, then that is going to happen to Israel. That whatever the Bible says is going to happen, that's literally going to be. The covenantal approach looks at the church and says that when you see the word Israel or the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, it's referring to the people of God. And in the Old Testament, the people of God are the Jewish descendants of Abraham. And in the New Testament, the people of God is the church. Are the church? Is the church. People of God is the church. And that's called successionism, the idea that the church has replaced the nation of Israel in terms of Bible prophecy. Okay, and so you have, and this is a good men differ kind of thing, that there are people that are on both sides of the issue. And so the idea then is that because God said to Abraham in Genesis 12 or 15, I forget where it is, I'll bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you, that promise goes to all of Abraham's descendants, to the people of Israel. Now the tricky part is when you start looking at what we refer to as the nation of Israel, that is that land over there that has a capital in Jerusalem and a government, and Benjamin Netanyahu is the president. Is that the nation of Israel, as we look at it, is that the people of Israel that God is talking about in the New Testament, okay? And not everyone agrees that it is, okay? And if you think that it is, then you are in a position like Ted Cruz, and you're saying, well, we need to support Israel because in the dispensationalist scheme of things, Israel has a significant role to play, and we need to protect that role, and we need to do whatever we can, and we're going to be blessed because of it. Okay, if you're not of that camp, then you're not necessarily having to say, well, no, we have to support Israel for that reason. Even if you are, now I'm just full disclosure, I do not believe that the nation of Israel today, what we call the nation of Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu, is the Israel that is talked about in the Bible. Okay, there's a huge overlap, don't get me wrong, okay? But Israel existed when Jesus was on earth. The people of God existed when Jesus was on earth, yet there was no Israeli leader, so to speak. There was no government of Israel at the time. So it's the people of Israel, which include any Jewish descendant, I guess. That's again, good. This is a good people, different kind of thing. Even if you are of the opinion that the nation of Israel is the current nation of Israel is the people of God spoken of in the Old Testament, that doesn't mean that we have to uncritically look and support whatever it is they do. There was no question, and you were wondering, what has this got to do with David? Here it comes. What? Here it comes. Here it comes. You know, there was no question that David was the king of God's people, and yet we can look at the life of David critically and say, this is a bad idea. He shouldn't have done this. And we see that God certainly comes in and says, that was a bad idea. You shouldn't have done that. Okay, sort of thing. And this had very disastrous consequences for doing this. So again, so who knows how this is all going to play out? I don't know. But I just wanted to this is sort of the theological underpinnings, which made me think, okay, then I thought, well, maybe I'll do a series on dispensationalism. And I thought, well, if I did Daniel and Revelation, it would come out kind of as you talk about what dispensationalism is, or covenant theology. So who knows how this is going to play out? We certainly are going to pray for this because Iran will retaliate somehow. It's just a question of how. I do not. There isn't an embassy there for them to take over. At least there isn't a U.S. embassy. But there are U.S. citizens in Iran, and who knows what's going to happen. So we should continue to keep that situation in prayer as we. I said all that to say we should pray for this situation. All right. To be wild and crazy this week, I brought the handouts. All right, we are in 2 Samuel 14 today. 2 Samuel 14. Now, previously we had talked about. Now, this is the the after effects of David and Bathsheba are happening here. Okay, so previously Amnon, who had been the heir to the throne, had raped his half sister Tamar, and 2 years later he is subsequently killed by his half brother Absalom. Okay, so, and you remember that last week when we talked about it, we said, Absalom was the good guy. And in fact, he's still kind of a good guy in this session too. Okay, we don't really see, until we get to the end, we don't really see anything you want to talk about Absalom. It's all kind of questionable. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? I don't, he kind of. But so 2 years. So it was 2 years after the rape that Amnon is killed. And so Absalom has left to the land of Geshur, which is where his grandfather lives, his grandparents live. And we find out that he's there for 3 years. Okay, so he's been in this land for 3 years, just as sort of a punishment, so to speak, for killing his brother. Coincidentally, the first murder in the Bible is also a brother killing a brother. Anybody remember that one? Yeah, it was Cain and Abel. And I'm gonna use the board today. Just getting wild and crazy. Okay, so you have a brother here. So this is Abel here, and this is Cain. You'd never guess I went to art school, did you? It's because I didn't. So this is Cain over here, and Cain kills Abel, okay, in a field. Remember, rose up and all of that kind of stuff. They do look pretty close, don't they? Kind of. So should I put like one with blonde hair and one with black hair? So and so then Cain goes to escape, worried that somebody is going to attack him. And so if you remember the story, and this is in Genesis 4, I want to say, God puts a mark on Cain so that nobody can hurt him. Even though he has committed murder, now this is before the law has been passed, but still, God has put this mark on Cain so that he's not going to be injured. Okay. So, in looking at Amnon, okay, well, what should have happened to Amnon? Okay, what should have happened to Amnon? And this is something that I had, and I just kind of was going through the various verses in the Old Testament and say, what should have happened to Amnon? Well, in Leviticus 18:11, the text forbids sexual relations between half siblings. So this is perhaps this law says this is why Amnon felt that there was no hope. He was never going to be able to marry or have Tamar because Leviticus said, no, it's an incest rule. Okay, so defining how far out does incest go. It's like, well, half sibling. Pardon me? You probably should have thought of that beforehand. Yeah. Yes, but he was so in love. He was so in love. And the punishment for violating this was that the violator is to be cut off from their people. Now this assumes This assumes consensuality, that both individuals are party to this event. Okay. Now in Deuteronomy 22. Okay, so in Deuteronomy 22, beginning with 23 through 30, there's a set of rules, laws about basically rape. And it says, if a man sleeps with an engaged virgin in the city, okay, somebody who is engaged but has not consummated the marriage yet in the city, if they do that in the city, they both die. Okay, and the reason they both die is because later on you find out if you sleep with a single engaged woman in the country, only he dies. Okay, the girl doesn't die. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is in the city, it is assumed that she didn't scream out. Okay, and in the country, meaning don't do that, kind of like what Tamar was saying, don't do this, you'll be a fool, this is a bad idea, that she didn't resist because somebody would have heard her and would have stopped it. In the country, it's assumed that she resisted and nobody heard. Okay, this is in the text, so I'm not making this up. Okay, kind of thing. Okay, so what's interesting about that is, what does Amnon do after he brings Tamar in? He sends everybody out. Now I don't know to what extent anybody could hear, but so in that case, the man should have died. Okay, the man should have died. Okay, so what should have happened, and this is kind of the gist here. What should have happened? Perhaps Amnon and Tamar should have both been killed if it was a consensual thing, according to the law. Big if there, because it wasn't. They should have both been killed. If it wasn't a consensual thing, if it was clearly a rape, which is what the text says it is, and what the all indications are, then Amnon should have been killed. Okay. Because she certainly did. We know that she complained. We know that she protested, and the gist of it is that wasn't carried out. Okay, so remember we talked about David and his family. So David, what was David? David was furious. Well, yeah, okay. And this is, but if he and then later on it says if a man rapes a non-engaged woman, meaning somebody who is non-engaged, no marriage prospects on, then he pays a fine, has to marry the girl, okay, and can never divorce her. This is again, this is in the text. I'm not making this up. So and this is why I said it depends on whether you consider, well, something should have happened to Amnon. Okay, there's no question that something should have happened to Amnon. Okay, it depends on whether you consider Tamar to have been engaged or not. Now you remember, the daughter of a princess, she may not have been engaged, but she certainly had a purpose. The daughter of a king, she may not have been engaged, but she certainly had a purpose. Okay, her purpose was to be married to someone that was going to draw in a political alliance. Okay, so it depends. Was she engaged? Was she not engaged? It really doesn't matter, because nothing happens to Amnon from David's point of view. Okay, by David. David doesn't do anything. He's just furious. Maybe he gives him the silent treatment for a while. I don't know. But 2 years later, it's Absalom that is the one that takes things into his own hands and arranges this big party. And he tells his men, hey, listen, when Amnon is drunk and in good spirits. So again, the fact that Amnon is out there drinking, having a good time, and he anticipates he's going to be in good spirits does kind of suggest that Amnon is not feeling very guilty about the whole thing. Okay, now that's speculation on my part, but I think it kind of follows. And so Amnon is killed after that. So what should have happened? What should have happened to Absalom? Well, this one is a little clearer, because in Genesis 9:6 it says, if somebody spills blood, by him blood should be spilled. Okay, and in Exodus 21, there's other things where it says, hey, you do this kind of thing, you need to get killed. Okay, you need, capital punishment is very clearly an Old Testament, a Torah law kind of value. So Absalom should have been punished, unless you see Absalom as being what's called the avenger of the blood. Okay, so again, in the Torah, it's set up that if person A kills person B, so if somebody kills somebody, okay, and then this person gets away, that there's somebody out there under the law who can kill this person on behalf of the family. That person is called the avenger of the blood. This is where the idea of sanctuary cities comes in. Okay, in Deuteronomy 20, I think I'm going to get to it a little bit later. I may have gotten away from myself. Okay, so that there's somebody that could have come in and punished him. Okay, but of course, Absalom doesn't hang around. He takes off. Okay, so he's got this cloud hanging over his head. What should happen to Absalom? Okay, everybody kind of knows that Absalom has done this, and yet everybody also knows that Absalom is the one that took care of this problem that David didn't, or wouldn't, or couldn't. Okay, now this is going to become important, because later on, Absalom's going to come around, it's going to say, listen, I can take care of business better than David. Okay, so, all right, so, chapter 14, beginning with verse 1. Joab, son of Zeruiah, here we go, another one of David's family, okay, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. Knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab is that close that he knows that David has been thinking about Absalom. Now, I use the word obsessed. So Joab, David's nephew, army commander, and major advisor, knows that David can't stop thinking about Absalom. I think obsession is a better word, because the word there that's translated longing could mean against. Okay, I mean, not that he's, oh, I sure wish Absalom was here. I miss Absalom so much. That could be what it is. Okay, or it could be, it's like, what is wrong with this kid? Why did he do this? Okay, I wish he hadn't. Why didn't he talk to me? Why didn't I take care of, kind of thing. But Joab says he's clearly obsessed with Absalom. Okay, and it's usually translated that he's longing for, because later on, at the death of Absalom, you see that David clearly likes Absalom, clearly loves his son, and there's a whole sad scene there. Oh, Absalom, would that I had died for thee, kind of thing. Absalom later on. So usually it's translated, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so it could have been that he was just really, angry with him, and rightly so. But Joab has a plan. Joab has a plan to reunite Absalom with David. So here's another relative of David who's got an idea of how to get together two people in the family. Now, this really worked well the last time. Okay, if you remember, Jonadab, a relative, said, I can get these two together. And so Joab comes up with a plan of, hey, I can get these two together. Okay, so Joab, he knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa and had a wise woman brought from there. Okay, so Joab has a plan. He sends to Tekoa, the future home of the prophet Amos. I don't know if you remember the Old Testament minor prophet Amos, a shepherd of Tekoa. Okay, same town, only that's like 200, 300 years later. And he finds a wise woman. Okay, and that's all she's called. She's not given a name, but this wise woman from Tekoa. This is another example, and that's just one of the interesting things about, and the role of women in the book of Samuel here to me has been fascinating. Kind of you see that on periodic occasions there's a crisis and some woman steps in and fixes it. Okay, so there's a crisis and then Hannah comes in 1 Samuel 3, and then there's David is going to go kill off Nabal, and Abigail comes in and fixes it. Now here, Joab has to go to Tekoa to find a wise woman. Apparently, there are no wise women in Jerusalem, but whatever. But Joab's got a plan. Okay, so he said to her, pretend you are in mourning, dress in mourning clothes, and don't use any cosmetic lotions. Act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words to him. And Joab put the words up in her mouth. So he says, dress like you're in mourning, act like you have been grieving for many days. And of course, any excuse for quoting Hamlet is a good one. Speak the speech, I pray, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue, not with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he goes with this woman and he says, okay, this is what you're going to do. You are going to go and present a false scenario to the king, okay? And then we're going to slam the door on him, okay? Has this been done before? Yes, okay? Maybe Joab was there when Nathan saw how well it worked. He said, okay, David's kind of clueless. He's not going to pick up on what's going on. So you're going to do this, okay? You're going to tell this story, and then everything is going to go right according to plan, okay? So when the woman from Tekoa went to the king, that could be translated, spoke to the king, she fell with her face to the ground to pay him honor and said, help me, your majesty. Now, it's interesting thing is that 3 times in this text, you're going to see somebody falling to the ground in front of David, okay? Falling to the ground, okay? So here the first one says, help me, your majesty. So she falls on her feet, or falls on her face. This is the first or third time. Compare that to 1 Samuel 25 when what does Abigail do? She walks up to David and falls on her face. And the indications in the text is she makes her whole speech saying from the ground. Abigail does, okay? So it could be that this woman is making her whole speech with her face to the ground, okay? We don't really know. But it says, the king asked her, what's troubling you? Okay, because it's a rule of kings, no king likes to see a crying woman. Okay, I don't know, maybe it's in the Hebrew. Okay, you gotta, but says, I am a widow, my husband is dead, I, your servant, had 2 sons. Oh, whoa, boy, I can't imagine how this is going to go. Okay, so there's 2 sons. Okay, so she has 2 sons, and he says, they got into a fight with each other in a field, and no one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Okay, now, again, this is a part of an argument. So this kind of really falls into the story, or into the template that's laid out in the Torah about how do you handle these situations. Okay, so that is the one, if it's accidental or you didn't really mean to, etc., the one person can run to a sanctuary city. Now, apparently he hasn't done that. So this one, again, has killed his brother, and now he wants to escape. Okay? So the trouble is, there's the town. This is the town. Maybe I should do little buildings instead. Is saying to the woman, hey, we want this guy. We want to get him. And she says, one struck the other. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. And when she says your servant, she's talking about herself. Okay, so the whole clan, her whole family, has said, let's give us this son who killed this guy. And then they also point out, which kind of suggests that there's a little mercenary, or it's a little less honorable than you think. Hand over the one who struck his brother down so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother. Okay, so far so good. Whom he killed. Then we will get rid of the heir as well. Okay, so at that point, the woman, who's a widow, doesn't have a husband, doesn't have any other sons, then whatever wealth she had or her family was responsible for would go back to the larger family. Okay, and she would be left destitute. Okay, so again, we've talked about this before, that if a woman in this time period didn't have a husband or a son, she was in trouble. She had nothing. She had no security. Okay, so hand over the one. They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth. Okay. The king said to the woman, go home, and I will issue an order on your behalf. Okay. So she tells the king her sad story. She's a widow with only two sons. In a fight in a field, one son killed the other. Now the remaining son is in danger from the clan and the avenger of the blood. So now they're thinking there's this avenger of the blood over here that wants to get him too, maybe on behalf of the clan. Again, this is from the Old Testament. Okay. So David says, go home, and I will issue an order on your behalf. But the woman from Tekoa said to him, let my lord the king pardon me and my family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt. Okay. David vaguely promises to take care of it, but the woman presses, or pursues, or persists. So I'm giving you a choice. Choice is a good thing. So you can, any one of those letters that start with P, or words that start with P. Okay. In 14:9, and this is an interesting thing, the woman from Tekoa said to him, let my lord the king pardon me and my family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt. Okay. So in this passage, the woman is either asking for a pardon, right? That, and pardon me, you're not at fault. That's how the NIV translates it. Okay. No one else translates it that way. And I couldn't get a good explanation why. Okay, so the NIV says, the woman says, let my lord the king pardon me and my family, and let the king and his family, its throne, be without guilt. The ESV says, and the woman of Tekoa said to the king, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house let the king and his throne be guiltless. The CEV, Contemporary English Version, says, the woman said, I hope your decision caused any problems for you, but if it does, you can blame me. The New American Standard says, the woman of Tekoa said to the king, oh, my lord the king, the iniquity is on me and my father's house, but the king and his throne are guiltless. The Net Bible says, the Tekoan woman said, my lord the king, let any blame fall on me and on the house of my father, but let the king and his throne be innocent. And the New Revised Standard Version says, the women of Tekoa said to the king, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house, let the king and his throne be guiltless. Okay, so just kind of interesting that I don't know why. I don't have an explanation. I was looking for an explanation. No, I didn't see one. Excuse me. But she's either asking for a pardon, as the NIV has it, or she's willing to take the blame, which is almost every other translation seems to suggest. That she says, "Oh, listen, I understand. Don't put yourself out here. I'll take the blame for whatever happens. For not giving him up." Okay. And so David says, if anyone says anything to you, bring them to me, and they will not bother you again. Okay. Again, the woman presses. She says, then let the king invoke the Lord his God to prevent the avenger of blood from adding to the destruction so that my son will not be destroyed. And this whole avenger of the blood, this is in Numbers 35, if anybody is curious about that. Okay. Finally, David swears, as surely as the Lord lives, he said, not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground. So he swears that nothing is going to happen. So what David does here is he says, all right, I am going to put the same kind of mark that God does here on your son so that nothing happens to him. Okay? So you got the brothers killing each other, et cetera, the whole thing, right? So you got same son, I'm going to protect your son. Everything. Are we done? Okay. Not quite. Because the woman, and this is the way a couple of people have said the woman is there's two ways to look at this. That the woman is telling her story, then she slips into reality, and then she goes back to telling her story again. I think that this slipping into reality is part of the story. Okay? And what I mean by that is she says, then the woman said, let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. Okay? And the Net Bible adds, about another matter. So the woman is in front of her, and again, this is in front of the king. This is a king who has the power to kill you, right? She says, wait a minute. Can I ask you something else here? I mean, you told me what I want to hear, but can I ask you one other thing? And I think the point that the woman is about to make, and this is where it's going to come home to David, is that how can I trust you to follow through when you haven't done so with your own son? Is essentially the point she's making here. Okay? She says, the woman says, let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. And this is where David makes his mistake. He says, speak. Maybe he should have just said, that's enough. I think we're done here. But he doesn't. He says, speak. Okay, and the woman says, why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not does he not convict himself, for the king has not brought back his banished son? Whoa, wait a minute. So we've got, this is Absalom over here. And this is Amnon over here. And Absalom kills Amnon. All right? And then he takes off, and he's in Geshur now. And why is he in Geshur? Well, because there's an avenger, and who would the avenger in this situation be, most likely? David, who is obligated, by virtue of being the king and keeping the law, of taking care of Absalom, i.e. killing Absalom, if he were to ever return. And so the woman says, you haven't done this, you haven't put this mark here on your son, like you said you would do for mine. How can I trust you to do this for me if you won't do it for yourself? Okay. And the king says, like water spilled to the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But that is not what God desires. Rather, he devises way so that a banished person does not remain banished from him. Going back up here, Cain should have been killed, but God came up with a way to get around it. Okay? And he said, this is what God, God has the rules, but there are ways that God wants to preserve life. Why aren't you doing that for your son if you say you're going to do it for mine? Okay. But that is not what God acts just as David acted in this fictional account. And now, verse 15, and now I have come back to say this to my lord the king because the people have made me afraid. She's like, I'm worried. It's like, I'm thinking, if you're not going to protect your own son, how are you going to protect mine? Okay, and I have, and really maybe she's implicating, I have more to lose here than you. You have other sons. I don't. Okay. Your servant thought, I will speak to the king. Perhaps he will grant his servant's request. Perhaps the king will agree to deliver his servant from the hand of the man who is trying to cut off both me and my son from God's inheritance. Okay. And that would be, again, that's that avenger of the blood. So the woman sees a conflict between what the king says and what he did on behalf of his own son. David's son, Absalom, is in danger from the avenger of the blood. Absalom's death might, speculation here, this is just, might make his mother destitute. I don't know, just kind of a putting it into the story. It's complete speculation on my part. David has made no steps to protect him. Okay, but according to the woman, David's words, what he said to her, are consistent with how God would look at it. So why aren't your actions consistent with the way that God has put it? She knows that David really would never be that way with his own son. There has to be a mistake. Okay, and she ends her speech with a healthy dose of flattery. Okay, verse 15. And now I have come to say, I'm sorry, verse 17. And now your servant says, may the word of my Lord the king secure my inheritance. For my Lord the king is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. This is usually how Debbie refers to me. You're like an angel discerning good and evil in my dreams, perhaps. And then I wake up and like, no. May the Lord your God be with you. Now, by this time, David is not as clueless as you might think. Okay. And I suspect, and we'll find out, well, I'll tell you why in a minute. Then the king said to the woman, I've got a question for you. Don't keep from me the answer to what I'm going to ask you. So this woman has just kind of flattered him, sort of a left-handed compliment kind of thing, or damning with faint praise. This whole thing is like, oh, your words, but he would never be like that. And you're an angel discerning good and evil, and you want to be like God. And so I know that you would not do that to your own son. And he says, then the woman says to the king, let my lord the king speak. Again, this is like the opposite. Remember, she said, can I ask you something? And now David's like, can I ask you something? I have a question for you. And don't lie to me. Okay? She says, isn't the hand of Joab with you in all of this? I think he realizes, wait a minute. Okay? Who says you can't teach an old dog new tricks? But isn't the hand of Joab? The woman answered, as surely as you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything my lord the king says. Yes, it was your servant Joab who instructed me to do this and who put all these words into the mouth of your servant. Your servant Joab did this to change the present situation. What situation? This situation. Okay, to change the present situation. My Lord has wisdom like that of an angel of God. He knows everything that happens in the land. Okay, I mean, again, she's laying it on super thick because maybe at this point she doesn't know if he's mad or not. So it's like, okay, so I think this is a great how she's giving it all to Joab and praising the king for figuring this out. Again, I'm just now. Maybe the rest of the speech was, listen, I'm just a messenger here. Okay, don't kill the messenger. Kill Joab. Don't kill me. I don't know. Again, speculating here. Now, verse 21, the king said to Joab. Now, one of two things has happened. Okay, either there's been a break in the action and Joab has been called into the room, or, and what I think, Joab has been standing there the whole time. Because it just says, and this is why, you can just imagine the scene. He's talking to the woman and he says, tell me, and maybe he's looking at Joab. I'm going to use Ed as Joab. He's looking at Joab and he says, is the hand of Joab in this? And the woman is like, maybe some of you have been caught in a situation like that. It would be a good thing. Who planned this birthday party, surprise birthday party for me? Kind of thing. The king said to Joab, very well, I will do it. Go bring back the young man Absalom. Okay. Joab, for the second time in this chapter, we see someone fell with his face to the ground to pay him honor, and he blessed the king. Joab says, today your servant, now he's talking about himself, Joab, knows that he has found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, because the king has granted his servant's request. Okay. By this time, let's see here. She ends her speech with a healthy dose of flattery. My lord the king is like an angel of God discerning good and evil. By this time, the king has seen through the woman's situation. Isn't the hand of Joab with you in all of this? The king then speaks directly to Joab. Either there's a break Or Joab is standing there all along. Joab falls on his face, second or third time. To pay honor to the king, he's instructed to bring back Absalom. Then Joab, verse 23, went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. Okay, so now he's gone. He's brought him back. Yes.
What? I don't trust Joab. What is his ultimate motivation? Is he just trying to make himself more valuable to the king, more valuable to Absalom? I mean, I know he ends up on David's hit list when David's getting ready to die, and he tells Solomon,
Yeah, that's a whole interesting thing.
Get rid of him. But what's going on in Joab's mind? I mean, he's got this whole big manipulation. Is it because he loves the king and doesn't want to see him so sad about it? What's the deal?
I know. Do you have the answer?
No, but I'll just say, like, Absalom shouldn't trust Joab. Like, David should probably trust Joab more than you'll see.
So,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know. I mean, here it could be that, for 2 years, David has been obsessed with, and I think the easiest explanation is based on that 14. So the question is, what is Joab's motive? What is Joab trying to accomplish from this? I think the easiest suggestion would be that based on the first verse of chapter 14, that Joab, that the king longed for, was obsessed with him, and perhaps Joab realizes we have got to fix this, or the king is never going to. Because again, once that king is out of there, there's no telling what's going to happen to Joab. Joab may realize that his success is dependent on David remaining king, happily remaining king, productively remaining king. And as long as David is groveling or obsessed over over Absalom, it's never going to happen. That would be the easiest answer. Does Joab have any other? Does Joab? Absalom is the next in line too. So if you think about it, you say, okay, well, I've got to get this if I want my continued preservation. So to me, it's all about self-preservation on his part.
Right.
So if he's seen as helping Joab or as helping Absalom come back, then of course, when Absalom comes into his own, he will be that much more appreciated.
But he's kind of going like circumstance by circumstance,
Yes.
making sure he comes out good, but he
Right.
doesn't have like a long range.
I don't think so, because in a minute, to me, something doesn't happen that I think should, that kind of belies what I just said about Joab having the long range plan. And what it is here is when Absalom comes back into Jerusalem. So Joab goes and gets Absalom. Hey, your father said you could come back to Jerusalem. Okay, and Jerusalem is the capital. It's where the palace is. It's where David is. And so I think implied in that is that the king wants you to come back. And then suddenly, as he gets back in, it says, but the king said, so it went and brought Absalom back. Absalom is back. I'm suspecting that Joab comes to the king, says, okay, Absalom's here. He wants to see you. And then the king drops this little gem. But the king said he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. So Absalom went to his own house and did not see the face of the king. Okay. Now this goes on, and we're going to find out later, this goes on for 2 years. So Absalom now is in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing the king, which is weird. Why let him back in if you don't want to see him? Maybe maybe David is just giving in to Joab because he knows how important Joab is. Maybe he knows that the crown prince needs to be in town. What is David's plan here? I don't know. Okay, although David's, ultimately Solomon is going to become the king, and we'll find out how that plays out later on. Okay, but then there's a little parenthetical thing where they discuss Absalom. In all Israel, verse 25, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. This is actually on my business card about me from the top. There was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut his hair once a year because it became too heavy for him. He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standards, which is like 5 pounds of hair. Okay, that's a lot of hair. Okay, so this has a very thick, luxurious mane. Okay, and he would let it grow, which kind of makes you think of Samson. Maybe the author is trying to draw a parallel in. Of course, he brings it in here because if you know the story and you know how Absalom ends up dying, how he gets caught, let's put it that way, you know it has to do with his hair. Okay, and contrary to any of the sermons I heard in the 1970s, this is not an indictment of having long hair. Although it is true that if his hair had been shorter, he probably wouldn't have been caught up in a tree. So, I mean, draw your own conclusion there. But he says he used to cut his hair. He would do it. So, but what's interesting about that? Okay, so we are told that Absalom is highly praised for his handsome appearance. Okay, what's interesting about that to me is that, and I put 3 passages there. They're really out of order. So 16:7 is the first verse you'd think about, because 16:7 is the one that the Lord doesn't, man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart, kind of thing. Okay. Now, 1 Samuel 9:2, there's a description of Saul. And the description of Saul is that he's very tall and that there was no one as handsome as him in Israel. And then in 16:12, after saying that the Lord looks on the heart, there's a description of David as being handsome and ruddy and of good appearance, kind of thing. So it's so it's a good looking family. Let's put it that way. We know that, okay. Which again, it's on the Shea Ray door, friend. Shea, we're good looking family, kind of thing. You're all supposed to go, of course, amen. This is where you're supposed to. This is where the feedback comes in. Fine, I see how it is. See if I plan a birthday party for you guys. No, I'm just kidding. So, verse 27, 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. His daughter's name was Tamar, and she became a beautiful woman. So, this is going to become problematic because in chapter 18, we're going to read about Absalom building a monument to himself because he doesn't have anyone to carry on his name. So, one of 2 things happened. Either all 3 of these sons die early, okay, or die at some point before the monument is made, or the monument is built before the sons are born, which could be. I don't know. But of course, then he throws out that he names his daughter Tamar. Okay, and if you remember, Tamar is living in his house. Okay, now whether she was still there while he was in Geshur or not, we don't know. But he names his daughter Tamar, no doubt in honor of his sister, who will live for how long we don't know. Verse 28. Verse 20. I'm sorry. Yeah, verse 28. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come to him. Now this is the thing. Now if Joab is hitching his star to the Absalom wagon. You hitch your star to a wagon, right? Isn't that how the phrase goes, right? Hitch your star to a wagon. If he's trying to jump on the Absalom train here, first of all, why doesn't he complain when Absalom isn't allowed to see the king's face? Maybe he does. Maybe it's just not part of the story. I don't know. But then it's like when Absalom wants to see him, why doesn't he go? Okay, I mean, this is the crown prince. You're the chief of the army, and the crown prince wants to see you, the heir apparent to the throne. Okay. We don't. So he says, sends for him 3 times. Where am I on this here? So why does Joab refuse to come to Absalom? I don't know. Absalom sends 3 times, but Joab refuses. Maybe Joab figures, you know what? This isn't. Maybe by this time in the course of the thing, we know that Solomon is going to become the king. Because Solomon is born. Maybe at this point we know that the word on the street is Solomon is going to be the next king. Okay. There's that thing, you ever notice in the Bible, we always talk about how, it's the firstborn, but like every story in the Bible involves somebody not the firstborn. Like David is not the firstborn, all this kind of stuff. Solomon is not the firstborn. Okay. Judah is not the firstborn. Sorry. Abel, Seth, the line of is not the firstborn. Okay. Isaac is not the firstborn. Joseph is not the firstborn. Okay, all of this, it's like, here's the rule, and let's just break it through the whole Bible. Okay, but whatever. But maybe by this time he's known that. For whatever reason, he doesn't. And so he said to his servants, look, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Now, if I ever have a group of servants, I want servants like Absalom's got. Okay, I mean, this guy, he says, look, my brother over there, the crown prince, when he's drunk, kill him. Okay. Hey, you know that house over there? There, go burn that down. Okay. This is the kind of people I want working for me, not against me. Okay, but working for me. Just go do that. Okay, go commit this crime. Sure. Okay, so that gets Joab's attention. Okay, when Joab did go to Absalom's house, and he said to him, "Why did your servant set my field on fire?" Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you and said, 'Come here, so I can send you to the king to ask, why have I come? It would be better for me if I was still there.'" Okay, well, because I called you 3 times and you didn't come. Okay, now, if you have children at home and you call them 3 times, I do not suggest burning up their stuff to get their attention, although it will work. Okay, it will work. Not a good plan. Okay, so then Absalom says, "Now then, I want to see the king's face, and if I am guilty of anything, let him put me to death." Okay, so now what he's doing now is he's testing this here. And the thing is this, the woman has already shamed him, but he's been in town for 2 years. So if David was going to do something, he had 2 years to do it. And now it would really look bad if David decided, you know what, I think we should kill Absalom for killing Amnon 5 years ago. Kind of, it's just not a good look. And besides, he's been backed into the corner and that he's not going to do it. So Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and bowed down with his face to the ground for the 3rd time. Okay, so Joab does Absalom's bidding, and the king agrees to see Absalom. When Absalom comes into the king, he bows down with his face to the ground. It's the 3 out of 3. And then it says, and the king kissed Absalom. Now, what's interesting about that phrase, and I'm going to end it, says, and the king kisses Absalom, is that depending on how you look at that, that's a good thing or it's a bad thing. Okay, is this David making up? Is it because it isn't David? It isn't the father hugs the son. It's the king kisses Absalom. Okay, so is it just okay, I acknowledge you're back in town kind of thing? Or some commentators will look at, Brueggemann, we talked about earlier, Brueggemann looks at this as a great rapprochement that they've gotten together. Okay, Bergen, the other main commentator, or no, Barton, one of the other commentators, says, no, this is just, David is doing the minimum. What's he doing? Well, he's back. Absalom is back. He's back in front of the king. He's made his appearance. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we'll find out next time. Any questions? All right. So again, next week, the Bogners, who are missionaries to Papua New Guinea, will be here. And then I think the week after that is July 4th, the July 4th weekend. If we do have Sunday school, then I'll be here. If we don't, then I won't. Well, I'll be here, but not here. And then the week after that, we'll either talk about the Scopes trial or we'll talk about Absalom's conspiracy, where they're wreaking havoc from outside of your own house. All right, thank you very much. Have a great day.
First time, and draw things, and then once he made them